Armand had been walking for hours under the warm afternoon sun, moving slowly through the narrow paths of the small border village. His boots were covered in dust, and his uniform felt heavy. But he kept going because it was his duty. The village was usually quiet, almost sleepy, but the last few days had been strange. Many homes looked empty, some shops were closed, and even the animals seemed to be hiding. Armand had been trained to notice small changes, and something inside him told him that this day was not going to be like the others. He stepped carefully around a corner and stopped for a moment to wipe the sweat from his forehead. He looked at the distant hills and took a slow breath. The silence around him was unusual. Normally, he would hear children laughing, women calling out to each other, or men working in the fields. But today, there was nothing except the sound of dry leaves moving gently in the wind. As he moved forward, he saw a small mud house on the right side of the narrow path. The house looked old but lived in. A clay pot sat outside the door, along with a small wooden stool. He thought it was strange that the door was half open. He looked around again, scanning the area to make sure everything was safe. Then he heard a soft, trembling sound. It was faint at first, like a hiccup mixed with fear. He stopped walking and listened more carefully. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was a child crying. Armand's eyebrows pulled together. A crying child in an empty village? That didn't feel right. He looked around again, slowly, making sure he wasn't imagining it. The sound was definitely coming from somewhere near the old mud house. He walked forward carefully, not wanting to scare anyone. When he reached the front of the house, he saw him a small boy sitting on the ground, with his knees pulled up to his chest. His head was down, and his tiny shoulders shook as he cried quietly. The boy looked around 6 years old, wearing a simple shirt and trousers that looked worn but clean. His hair was messy, and his face was dusty, but the tears on his cheeks were fresh. Armand felt something shift inside him. He had seen many difficult moments in his life, but the sight of a small child crying alone always touched his heart. He knew he had to be gentle. With slow steps, he moved closer and knelt a little distance away from the boy so he wouldn't feel scared. "Hey," he said softly, his voice calm and warm. "Why are you crying, little one?" The boy looked up slowly. His eyes were large and filled with tears, and his lower lip trembled. Armand noticed the boy's hands were tightly holding a small piece of cloth that looked like it belonged to someone older, maybe his mother, maybe someone he trusted. The boy didn't speak at first. He only stared at Armand's uniform with wide eyes. Armand understood that the child might be afraid. So he placed his own rifle gently on the ground beside him and made sure his hands were open and empty. "It's okay," Armand said softly. "I'm not here to scare you. I just want to help." The boy sniffed and wiped his face with his small hands. For a moment, he looked confused, as if he wanted to speak but didn't know how. Armand waited patiently, giving him space. Finally, the boy whispered, "Amy." Armand leaned forward slightly. "Your mother?" The boy nodded quickly, and new tears formed in his eyes. His fingers tightened around the piece of cloth. Armand's heart softened even more. He could tell the child was deeply worried. "Where is she?" Armand asked gently. The boy swallowed hard and looked over Armand's shoulder, toward the back of the house. His small hand slowly lifted, and with a trembling finger, he pointed in that direction. Armand followed the direction of the boy's finger but didn't see anyone immediately. Armand shifted a little so he could see the boy's face clearly. There was no fear in the child's eyes, now only desperation. Whatever he was pointing at mattered deeply to him. Armand knew this was important. "Is your mother over there?" Armand asked. The boy nodded again, this time faster, as if hoping Armand would understand his fear. Armand got to his feet calmly. He didn't want to leave the boy alone, so he offered his hand. "Come with me. We'll check together." But the boy shook his head and stayed where he was. He seemed too frightened to move. His small body trembled slightly. "That's fine," Armand said, trying to reassure him. Before turning, he reached for his rifle out of habit, but the boy's expression changed instantly. The child's eyes widened in fear as he stared at the weapon. Arman realized the boy didn't understand that it was only for protection. So Arman made a slow choice, a choice that came from his heart, not his training. He released the rifle from his hand completely and let it rest on the ground. The metal made a soft thud when it touched the soil. The boy's shoulders relaxed slightly. Arman gave him a soft smile. "See? Nothing to be scared of. I'm here to help." Then he took a few steps toward the back of the house. The sun behind him cast long shadows, and the dry ground crunched under his boots. Each step felt heavier, not because of fear, but because of the responsibility he felt for the crying child sitting behind him. When he reached the corner of the house, he paused. The boy had pointed with such urgency that Arman knew something important was waiting there. He listened carefully, hoping to hear a voice or a movement. At first, there was nothing. Only silence. Then he heard a faint sound, so soft that he almost missed it. It was like a weak breath, or a tired whisper. He realized someone was there. Arman looked back at the boy briefly. The child's small eyes were fixed on him with hope and fear mixed together. Arman nodded as if telling him silently, "I'm checking." He turned fully and stepped behind the house. The sight he saw took him by surprise so suddenly that he lost his grip on his rifle strap, and the rifle slipped from his shoulder, falling gently to the dusty ground beside him. He didn't care about the weapon anymore. His eyes were fully fixed on the scene in front of him. There, behind the house, lay a woman probably in her early 30s, partially covered by a few fallen wooden beams from the fragile roof. She wasn't moving much, but Arman could see her chest rising and falling slowly. She was alive, but she was weak, tired, and unable to get up. Her clothes were dusty, and her hair was spread across the ground. But her face looked calm, as if she had been waiting for someone to come. Arman's mind raced, but not in fear. He felt a rush of compassion and understanding. The child had not been crying because he was lost. He had been crying because he had been trying to get help for his mother, alone, with no one to listen. Suddenly everything became clear. The empty home, the open door, the boy clutching the small piece of cloth. The cloth probably belonged to his mother. He must have been holding it all night, waiting for someone to notice. Arman's heart felt full. He realized this moment wasn't just another day on duty. It was a moment where humanity mattered more than anything else. He knelt beside the woman and gently checked her condition. She wasn't hurt badly. She was simply trapped and exhausted. Arman felt relief wash over him. She would be okay if she received help quickly. He stood up, turned around, and the boy was still staring at him from the front of the house. Seeing Arman, the boy slowly stood up on his small feet, as if scared to hope too much. Arman raised his hand and gave him a gentle nod. The child's eyes filled with fresh tears, not of fear this time, but of relief. Arman understood. He had found her, and for the first time that day, he felt the heavy silence of the village lift just a little, replaced by something warm and human. He picked up his rifle again, not because he needed it at that moment, but because he had a duty to protect these two lives now. But he carried it gently, making sure the child would not feel afraid again. He whispered under his breath, almost like a promise to himself, "You're safe now. Both of you." And with that, he walked back toward the little boy, ready to bring comfort, help, and hope to the small family that had been waiting quietly for someone to see them. Ayan had always been a quiet child. He did not talk much, but his eyes spoke for him. Anyone who met him felt tenderness toward him because he carried a softness that made people want to protect him. He lived with his mother, Sarah, in a small mud house near the edge of the village. Their home was simple, just 2 rooms, a clay stove outside, and a wooden cot where Sarah slept with Ayan curled beside her. Sarah had been a widow for 3 years. Life had not been easy for her, but she had learned to live with patience. She stitched clothes for the villagers, repaired torn shawls, and sometimes helped women with small household tasks to earn money. Every coin she earned went toward food, school notebooks, or medicines for Ayan whenever he fell sick. She was young, but hardship had already touched her life in many ways. Yet, she never let Ayan feel the weight of her struggles. She always said, "Ayan, as long as we are together, we will be fine." And Ayan believed her with all his heart. Their small home was filled with love, even though they had very little. Every morning, Sarah would heat water for tea, preparing a small cup for herself and a tiny one for Ayan. She would smile as he tried to copy her movements, blowing on the hot tea just like she did. After that, she would begin her sewing work, while Ayan either played nearby or sat beside her watching the needle move smoothly through the cloth. The villagers respected Sarah. They knew she worked hard and never depended on anyone unnecessarily. They admired the quiet strength she carried in her eyes. Some even offered help, but Sarah politely refused unless she truly needed it. She did not want to be a burden on anyone. Her pride was gentle, not stubborn, and her kindness made everyone treat Ayan with affection. One evening, a few days before Armin found the crying child, the village felt uneasy. People spoke softly about strange sounds near the outskirts. Some shopkeepers closed their stalls earlier than usual. Women hurried home before sunset. Even the animals seemed restless, as if they sensed something in the air. Sarah noticed the change too. She held Ayan's hand a little tighter whenever she stepped outside. "Stay close to me," she kept telling him. Ayan nodded each time, holding her fingers firmly. The day before everything changed, Sarah had been stitching clothes late into the night. A villager had asked her to finish a wedding dress quickly, and she wanted to do it on time. Ayan had fallen asleep near her, using her folded shawl as a pillow. She placed a soft hand on his head every now and then, checking if he was comfortable. Suddenly, she heard a noise, a loud crack from outside. It sounded like wood breaking. She froze. Then, she heard voices, distant but hurried. She quickly put down her needle and looked at the door. Ayan woke up, rubbing his eyes. "Ami?" "Shh," she whispered gently, pulling him closer. "It's okay. Stay with me." The sounds outside continued faintly, and Sarah felt her heart beating faster. She had lived in the village long enough to know when something felt wrong. She didn't want Ayan to feel scared, so she tried to act calm. But her eyes kept going back to the door. After a few minutes, the noise decreased. Perhaps the villagers had gone inside their homes. Perhaps it was only a false alarm. Sarah took a slow breath and decided to close her sewing for the night. But then she remembered something: her goats. She had 2 small goats that she kept tied behind the house. They were important to her. Not just for milk, but for comfort. They were living beings she cared for deeply. She had forgotten to check if their ropes were secure earlier. If the noise had scared them, they might have broken loose. She didn't want to leave them outside without checking, so she stood up quietly. "I'll be right back," she whispered to Ayan. "Where are you going, Ami?" he asked sleepily, grabbing her hand. "Just behind the house, Beta." "Don't worry." But Ayan did worry. He always worried when she stepped outside at night. His young heart carried fear easily. He didn't like the dark. He didn't like the silence outside their home. And he didn't want her to leave him alone, not even for a moment. "I'll come with you," he said in a shaky voice. Sarah smiled softly and held his face. "No. Stay inside where it's safe. I'll come back quickly. Promise." Ayan hesitated but obeyed. He trusted her promises more than anything. Sarah walked out into the night. The air was cool, and the sky was dark, sprinkled with small stars. The village looked strangely still. As she stepped behind her house, she called softly, "Lali, Boli," the names of her 2 goats. One of them made a soft sound, but the other didn't. Sarah felt a sudden worry. She moved quickly toward them. That was when she noticed a part of the mud roof above the storage area had become loose. Maybe the earlier noise had weakened it. Maybe the recent rain had softened the structure. She stepped closer, trying to reach the goat that wasn't responding. As she did, her foot slipped on uneven ground. The small wooden beams that supported the roof, already unstable, shifted slightly. Before she could step back, the fragile structure gave way. A few beams fell and pinned her down. It didn't hurt badly, but the weight was enough to keep her from getting up. She cried out softly. But it was the middle of the night. No one heard her. She tried calling Ayan, but her voice was too weak. She tried moving the beams, but they were too heavy for her tired arms. Minutes passed, then an hour, then another. She lay there helplessly, praying that Ayan would stay indoors. She didn't want him wandering outside and getting hurt. She hoped morning would bring someone who could help. Her breathing slowed, her eyes grew heavy. She whispered Ayan's name again and again, but no sound reached him. Inside the house, Ayan waited. First he sat near the door. Then he stood up and looked through the small crack. He saw nothing but darkness. His mother had promised to return quickly. Why wasn't she back yet? His small heart couldn't stay calm. He took the shawl she had used earlier, held it close to his chest, and stepped outside. His tiny feet moved quietly on the cold ground. He walked around the house calling softly, "Ami." There was no reply. Only the sound of his own trembling voice. He moved toward the back, but the night scared him. Shadows felt too big. The silence felt too heavy. His hands shook. He stopped walking when he saw something that made his heart freeze. His mother lying on the ground, half covered by wooden beams. He wanted to run to her, but he was too scared. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't lift the wood. He couldn't shout loud enough to wake the villagers. He felt helpless. Tears filled his eyes, and he hurried back to the front of the house, sitting down exactly where Armand later found him. He clutched the piece of cloth from his mother's shawl, the only thing that felt safe in his hands. He cried softly through the night, hoping someone would hear him. Every time he heard a distant sound, he lifted his head, thinking help was coming. But each time, silence returned. Hours passed, the night slowly faded, and the morning sun began to rise. Ayan did not sleep at all. His tears dried and returned again. At one point, he stood up and took a few steps toward the road, hoping someone would pass by. But no one did. He sat again, hugging his knees, praying in his small heart. He remembered his mother once telling him, "When you feel scared, look at the sky. Someone above is watching over us." So Ayan looked up again and again, as if searching for invisible help. By the time Armand walked into the village that morning, Ayan had lost count of how many times he had cried. His voice had become weak, and his body felt tired, but he did not leave the place where he could still see the back of the house from a distance. He stayed there because he believed his mother could still hear him. When Armand's footsteps approached, Ayan looked up with a mixture of fear and hope. He didn't know who this uniformed stranger was. But when Armand spoke gently, something inside Ayan trusted him. And when Armand asked why he was crying, Ayan's small heart finally found the courage to point toward the place where his mother lay. It was all he could do. He had spent the entire night waiting for someone to notice, someone to understand, someone to help, and that someone had finally come. When Armand stepped behind the small mud house and saw the woman lying there, his breath caught in his chest. For a moment, everything around him felt still. The faint breeze, the distant chirping of birds, the warm sunlight, none of it seemed real. All he could think about was the sight in front of him. A mother who had spent the entire night trapped alone, while her little son cried helplessly at the front of the house. The woman, Sarah, lay quietly on the ground. A few thin wooden beams rested across her legs and waist. They weren't heavy enough to cause deep harm, but they had clearly been too much for her to push away. Her hair was spread like a dark curtain around her face, and her hand rested gently on the earth, as though she had been reaching for her son. Armand knelt beside her and spoke softly. "Madam, can you hear me?" For a moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, her eyelids fluttered. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Armand felt a rush of relief. She was alive, weak, tired, and dehydrated but alive. He gently placed 2 fingers on her wrist, checking her pulse. It was faint, but stable. He lifted one of the smaller wooden beams carefully and set it aside. He worked slowly, making sure not to disturb her too much. When he moved the last piece of wood, she let out a soft sound, almost like a sigh of relief. Her lips parted slightly, and a whisper escaped. "Ayan." Her voice was weak. Barely a breath. But Armand heard it clearly. She was thinking of her child even in this condition. It touched him deeply. "He's safe," Armand said immediately, leaning closer so she could hear him. "Your son is safe. He's right in front of the house. I'm here to help you." A faint tear appeared at the corner of her eye, though she was too weak to wipe it away. Armand gently brushed the tear with his thumb so it wouldn't fall onto the dust. For a moment, she closed her eyes again, as if she needed strength just to speak. Then she whispered, "He was alone?" Armand nodded. "Yes. He was sitting outside, crying for you. He stayed there all night." Another tear formed in her eyes. This one, Armand let gently roll down, because sometimes tears are needed. He didn't want to interrupt her emotions. He simply stayed beside her, offering silent support. He knew he had to act quickly. The woman needed to be moved out of the sun. She needed water. She needed her son. And she needed proper help, so he reached for the small radio device he carried and pressed the button. "This is Armand. Emergency assistance needed near the north side of the village. A civilian woman is trapped but alive. Sending coordinates." The response crackled through the speaker. "Help on the way." Armand felt a bit lighter. Support would arrive soon. But he still had a responsibility to take care of her until then. He leaned close to Sarah again. "I'll bring you water. Don't try to move yet. I'll be right back." With slow steps, he walked back toward the front of the house where little Ayan still stood. The boy looked at him with wide, questioning eyes. His small fists were balled tightly, as if he needed courage to keep standing. Armand crouched in front of him. "Your mother is alive," he said softly. Ayan gasped. His eyes filled instantly with tears, not of pain, but of overwhelming relief. He covered his mouth with his tiny hands, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "She is alive," Armand repeated, resting a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "She's tired and needs help, but she's okay." Ayan nodded quickly, breathing fast, trying to hold back his tears. But his emotions were too strong. They spilled out in quiet sobs, the kind a child makes when he finally feels safe after a long, frightening night. Armand let him cry. Sometimes tears heal more than words. After a moment, he said gently, "Come with me. I'll take you to her." Ayan wiped his face with the back of his hand, nodded again, and followed Armand. His steps were shaky, but the hope in his heart gave him strength. As they reached the back of the house, Sarah heard footsteps and opened her eyes slowly. When she saw Ayan, her entire expression changed. A faint smile, weak but full of love, appeared on her lips. Her arms lifted just slightly, as if trying to reach for him. Ayan ran forward and knelt beside her, clutching her hand with both of his. "Ami," he whispered, tears falling freely again. Sarah touched his cheek with her trembling fingers. "My brave boy," she whispered back. Armand stepped back a little, giving them space. It was a moment meant for them, not for him. He watched quietly as mother and son shared a fragile but beautiful reunion. Ayan gently rested his forehead against her arm, as if reassuring himself she was real. After a few moments, Armand returned with a small bottle of water he carried. He uncapped it carefully and knelt beside Sarah. "Sip slowly," he advised. Sarah nodded weakly. Armand helped her lift her head, and she drank a few small sips. Her dry lips softened, and the color returned slightly to her cheeks. Ayan kept holding her other hand tightly, afraid to let go even for a second. "You're going to be okay," Armand said gently. "Help is coming." Sarah looked at him with gratitude in her tired eyes. She wanted to speak, but her voice wasn't strong enough yet. Armand understood everything she wanted to say, even without words. Ayan looked up at Armand too, with eyes full of trust, a trust that had grown only within minutes but felt deep and sincere. Armand gave him a reassuring smile. Minutes later, Armand heard distant footsteps and soft voices approaching. Backup had arrived, 2 fellow soldiers and a local medic who had been called in. They hurried toward the scene with supplies in hand. "Over here," Armand said, signaling them quietly. The medic knelt beside Sarah and checked her condition carefully. He nodded. She's weak, but she's stable. She just needs rest, water, and care. We'll move her gently to the clinic. Ayan tightened his grip on his mother's hand. I'm coming too, he said bravely, even though his voice was small. Of course, Armin said. You'll stay with her. The soldiers brought a soft stretcher and carefully lifted Sarah onto it. She whispered Ayan's name once more, and the boy immediately walked beside her, holding her hand the entire time. Armin stayed close, making sure they walked safely along the uneven path. As they moved toward the small clinic at the center of the village, villagers noticed the scene. Some came out of their homes, whispering with concern. When they saw Sarah, many lowered their heads with sympathy, wishing they had heard her cries earlier. Inside the clinic, Sarah was placed on a clean cot. The medic examined her again and began giving her proper care. Ayan sat on a small stool beside her, refusing to leave her side. Every few seconds, he looked up at her, checking if she was still there. Armin stood near the doorway, feeling a mixture of relief and quiet pride. He had seen many things in his life, but this moment felt different. It felt meaningful, human, pure. He watched as Sarah opened her eyes and looked at him with deep gratitude. She tried to speak, but Armin shook his head gently. Don't talk. Just rest. You have your son beside you, that's what matters. She smiled softly, understanding that he had done more for her and Ayan than she could ever repay. Ayan looked at Armin too, his small eyes filled with admiration. He whispered, "Thank you." Armin's heart warmed. He walked closer and brushed Ayan's hair lightly. Take care of her, little one. Take care of her. Ayan nodded proudly, as if he had just been given the most important duty in the world. As Armin turned to leave, he paused at the door and looked back one last time. The boy was holding his mother's hand, their fingers intertwined tightly. The sight filled Armin with a deep sense of peace. He stepped outside slowly, letting the warm sunlight touch his face. He had come to the village as a soldier on duty, but he was leaving that moment as a human who had witnessed love, courage, and the quiet strength of a child who never gave up on his mother. The next morning arrived gently, with soft sunlight warming the quiet village. The air still felt different, almost lighter, as if the whole place had released a long-held breath during the night. A few birds began singing from the branches of the neem tree outside the widow's home, and their peaceful notes carried through the stillness. Inside the small room, the child woke first. He rubbed his eyes, looked around, and saw his mother sitting near the window. She looked calmer today, though her eyes were still tired. She had not slept much, but her heart felt more at ease after everything that had happened. She watched her child sit up, stretch, and then look toward the door, as if expecting someone. Before she could speak, there was a soft knock. The child's face brightened instantly. He jumped from the bed and hurried to open the door. Standing outside was Arif, holding a small basket in his hand. He offered a shy smile, one that looked very different from the frightened, confused expression he wore the day before. He stepped inside slowly, as though afraid he might disturb the calmness in the house. The widow greeted him kindly, and he bowed his head respectfully. He placed the basket on the table. "I brought breakfast," he said softly. "I thought maybe you both could use something warm." Inside the basket were fresh flatbreads, honey, and a small pouch of dried fruits. The child clapped happily, as if someone had brought him a treasure. The widow stared at the basket with a gentle smile, touched by the sweetness of the gesture. "You didn't have to," she said, her voice soft. "But thank you." Arif shook his head lightly. "I wanted to," he replied. They all sat together at the small table. For the first time in a long while, the widow's home felt like a place where laughter could exist again. The child talked continuously, telling Arif how he had played with stones outside, how a butterfly had landed on his hand, and how he wanted to show Arif a drawing he made on the ground. Arif listened patiently, nodding and smiling. The widow watched them, feeling something in her heart she had not felt in months. Peace. It was strange how one moment, one unexpected encounter, could bring such change. After breakfast, Arif walked outside with the child. The boy took his hand naturally, as if they had known each other their entire lives. He guided Arif toward the old mango tree, where he had made lines in the dirt with a stick. "This is you," the child said proudly, pointing at a small circle he had drawn with a smiley face. Arif laughed softly. "And where am I going in this drawing?" The child pointed at another circle. "Here. This is Mama. You came to talk to her." Arif looked at the widow, who stood at the doorway watching them. She looked away quickly, her face turning slightly red. She did not know why she felt shy, but something about this simple moment made her heart flutter. Arif knelt down beside the drawing. "And who is this tiny one?" he asked, pointing at a small dot near the second circle. "That's me," the child said proudly. Arif nodded as if he understood the importance of being included. "It's a very nice drawing," he said. The child looked up at him with wide eyes. "Will you stay? Will you come again tomorrow?" Arif paused. The widow stepped forward, unsure of what he would say. The entire village still remembered who he was, and though he had not harmed anyone, memories and fears did not disappear quickly. But Arif smiled gently and placed a hand on the child's head. "If your mother says I can visit, I will." The widow felt her breath catch for a second. She knew this moment mattered. She could either close the door out of fear, fear of change, fear of what others might say, or she could choose something different, something that might bring new hope. "You can visit," she said softly. "You have helped us more than you know." "Cien." The child cheered happily, and Arif's eyes softened with gratitude. Throughout the day, Arif helped the widow with small chores around the house. He repaired a loose wooden plank near the door, fixed the old water pot that had a tiny crack, and even swept the front area of the house without being asked. The widow felt a mixture of surprise and warmth as she watched him. Every time she thanked him, he simply shook his head and said it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It meant everything. In return, she offered him lunch. She prepared a simple meal: rice, lentils, and a small vegetable dish. It wasn't fancy, but she put great care into it. Arif ate quietly and respectfully, as if the meal was a gift far greater than he deserved. After they finished eating, they sat outside on a small bench. The child played nearby, chasing a butterfly. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting soft shadows. The widow glanced at Arif. "You were very different yesterday," she said gently. "You looked afraid." Arif nodded. "I was. I didn't know what I would find, or what people would think of me." He paused, looked at the ground, and then continued. "But when your child pointed at the sky, something inside me changed. I realized I didn't want to be someone who carried fear everywhere. I wanted to be someone who brought safety instead." The widow listened quietly. His words felt honest, and there was a sincerity in his voice that made her trust him. "And you already helped," she said. "You helped when you listened." Arif looked up at her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, it felt like the world around them had gone silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Soft, peaceful silence. A silence that said two strangers were no longer strangers. Later that evening, Arif prepared to leave. The child held his hand tightly, refusing to let go. "You will come tomorrow, right?" he asked again. Arif bent down, smiled, and touched the child's cheek gently. "I promise," he said. The widow watched them from the doorway. She felt a small, new hope blooming inside her. A hope she had not expected when this day began. As Arif walked away, the child waved until he disappeared from sight. The widow stood quietly, the warm breeze brushing her face. She thought about how life had changed in just a single day. She thought about kindness, about trust, about new beginnings. That night, after putting her child to bed, she sat by the window. The moon shone softly outside, lighting the village paths. She remembered the moment when Arif had let his rifle fall, when he chose compassion instead of fear, when he looked at her child with eyes filled not with coldness, but with understanding. She realized that sometimes the world does not change with big events. Sometimes it changes with small moments. A child's innocent gesture, a man's unexpected kindness, a shared meal, a quiet conversation. The next morning, the village woke to a completely new feeling, not the tense silence of the past, but the gentle whisper of hope. People noticed Arif walking through the village with a calm expression. They noticed that he was not carrying anything in his hands, only a soft smile. Some nodded at him, uncertain but not afraid. Others simply watched from a distance. When he reached the widow's home, the child ran out before he could knock, laughing as he hugged him. Arif lifted him gently, smiling at the joy in the boy's eyes. Inside, the widow smiled, her heart full. And as days passed, the once quiet home became a place where new stories were shared, where a child laughed freely, where a woman felt safe again, and where a man learned what kindness truly meant. No one in the village forgot the moment when the child pointed, and the man let his rifle fall. But over time, they understood something more important. He didn't just drop a weapon, he dropped the weight he carried in his heart. And that simple act allowed new beginnings to grow quietly, gently, beautifully.